Hi, and welcome back to the Future of SaaS Festival. We hope you're enjoying the presentation so far. Just a quick reminder, if you're not already a member of our Slack community, follow the link at the top of the event website to network and join the discussion.
Hi everyone, really glad to have you here. So today we'll be talking about why women are leaving SaaS and how can we make the workplace more inclusive. My name is Mamta Suri and I'm a senior engineering manager at Workday, and I'm also a diversity and inclusion leader, founded one of the ERGs within Workday, and currently heading it as well. And I'm joined today by 4 panelists. I'm really excited to talk about to them on this topic. But before we get started, I did want to have these numbers out there. Why are we talking about this? 100% of the women who lost their jobs in December, or people who lost their jobs in December, were women. This is based on US data. That's a pretty high number, 100%. I've never seen a number that high. And 78% of women in tech feel that they have to work harder to prove their worth compared to their workmates. And during this pandemic, 42% of women took over all of the household work compared to only 11% of men. These are just some of the numbers that we are seeing. And to talk more about this and what can we do about making the workplace more inclusive for women, I'm joined by Sarah Joho, Robbie O'Neill, Jess Gosling, and Ted Selva. So I will turn the slides off now, and I will actually let them introduce themselves. Sarah, we'll go ahead with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I'm Sarah Johal. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior program manager for our marketing department at Workday headquarters. With 15 years experience of building brand value for tech startups, through that marketing journey, I've also founded and built ERGs that really focus and support caregivers and parents in tech. I will pass the mic over to Robbie next.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Robbie, and I am a senior customer success manager working at LinkedIn for about the last just over 2.5 years. I work with and consult with some of our largest clients, specifically revolved around their talent solutions, how they acquire talent, how they retain talent, and how they build their employer brand on the platform. And I'm based out of Dublin and extremely happy to be here as well. I will pass it across to Ted.
Hey everyone, I'm so glad to be here. I'm Ted Salva. I am a mom first and foremost, a partner, a daughter, a sister, and a friend. I am raising 4 multiracial girls ages from 6, 9, 12, and 15. I am currently an organizational strategist at Asana, and my professional career has spanned really in org transformation and talent strategy in various industries like advertising, technology, consumer goods, you name it. I am very passionate about this topic because a lot of the women who have left the workforce were women of color. And so I actually founded a passion project in 2017 called Mom Warrior. And that mission is to bring voice and amplify voices of women and caregivers of color, and hopefully help advance them in the workplace. And with that, I'll send it off to Jess.
Hello, everyone. If I can actually unmute myself, that's always a good start. My name is Jess Gosling. I'm a bit of a weird one. I work by day for the UK Civil Service, but my heart is definitely in the diversity and inclusion space. I am an award-winning entrepreneur for a social enterprise. I'm an academic, and I do a lot of stuff, as I said, in the kind of inclusion space. That's because I'm from a low socioeconomic background and neurodiverse by 3, which, if you don't know the term, I can helpfully, I'll send some links later. For me, it's always been around kind of building networks and forging interdisciplinary thinking through working on issues like gender mainstreaming, public policy, and digital inclusivity. And I've been doing that for the past 9 years. I began my PhD at UCL part-time in public policy last year, building on that idea of interdisciplinary thinking. And yeah, I'm passionate about building places where women and underrepresented groups can feel candidly themselves. And I'm really, really happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for those introductions. As you can see, this is a very diverse panel based on their career backgrounds, based on their geographical locations as well. So I'm really excited to be talking to all of you today. So thank you for taking this time. Jess, we'll start with you. Why do you think diversity and inclusion are important in the workplace?
Oh, that's very good point. Very good question to start with. Diversity and inclusion is vital in the workplace. It allows you to be innovative, be creative, stop siloed ways of working and siloed ways of thinking. I would never want to work in a place that didn't embrace diversity, because we all think the same things at the table. You run the risk of never being heard, right? And that's why, there's a lot of the challenge within a lot of workplaces now is that even though we're having these changes with like the ways of working and the future of work and the role of, say, AI, machine learning, and all these amazingly impactful technologies, the status quo within the actual dynamics of companies is quite interesting. You don't, in terms of representation, this is something personally very important to me, is that if you don't see it, how do you know how to be it? So if there aren't, VPs who are women or from different underrepresented groups, for the next generation, you're not going to see, other younger people aren't going to see that there's something that they can aspire to or be. And in my case, that I personally did feel that like that. And that's why diversity and inclusion is important, because, if you don't embrace diversity, it can have so many detrimental things if we don't embrace diversity, 100%.
Yeah, that's very well said. If you can't see it, how can you be it? And I actually have a daughter, and one of the reasons I am very passionate about it, just like Ted, I don't want our future generations to, fight these unseen battles that we are fighting. So it's very important to have that representation, because representation matters and role models in the industry matter. Robbie, Sarah, or Ted, do you guys have anything to add to that?
I'll jump
Yeah, I'll
in.
go.
I was just, please.
Go ahead, Sarah. Go for it.
No, all of us are super passionate in this space too. And selfishly, it starts with myself being a mother and a parent, also in a multiracial family, really trying to change the space and how we work together for her sake as well. But for our sakes, I think being a little even bolder to say we know better. Right? We know diversity, equity, and inclusion at this phase of our future of work and post-pandemic. We know the stats and data well enough to say it's not just the morally and ethically right thing to do as a business and putting your brand values in action, but the data shows your performance improves by having more diverse talent and more inclusive thought leadership behind those principles as well.
Absolutely. Ted?
Sarah captured it. I do think that apart from diversity, one of the things that we really should be talking about is and inclusion, right? Belonging. But I am a big proponent of access. And so a lot of the women who have left or are leaving and I know we'll get into this a little deeper, is access. And so it is important, I think, to think about diversity and inclusion, but it would be even better if we thought about it a step further and talked about access as well. And I'll leave it at that because I know there's more there. We're going to talk more about all the other things. So,
yeah, absolutely. So, Robbie, we talked about, why diversity and inclusion is better. How does diversity makes SaaS better, and why is it important for future of SaaS?
I think Sarah touched upon it. I think one of the key components is to be able to add or incorporate diversity of thought, in particular experiences and skill sets that are across all groups. In particular for the SaaS industry, it's been linked towards profitability. I've seen McKinsey reports that have said that there's a 25% profit differential between the least and most diverse companies around the world. And another McKinsey report that showed out that if gender equity was achieved, that we would have upwards of 28 trillion US dollars added into the global economy. So from a business point of view, it makes complete sense. And I think it was to your point as well, that is standing alongside the moral ethics of the conversation as well. Particularly within SaaS, I know when we look at the kind of the top-down approach and the leadership representation statistics that we see, we know that 85% of CEOs whose organizations have DIBS, and I'll use LinkedIn acronyms probably throughout the rest of the hour, but for diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategies, they say that this has enhanced their innovation as a business. And that permeates all the way down to individual teams, individual line managers, individual contributors. So it's so important within such a fast-paced and evolving industry, such as SaaS, to make sure that you have that diversity of thought. And to Tet's point as well, the access to those economic opportunities is so key and valuable to making sure that we can implement change at the grassroots level when people are entering into businesses, but then also facilitating and promoting the progression into management and into leadership roles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. Diversity improves profitability. It fosters innovation and leadership, and having those diverse roles in leadership roles is very, very key.
Malta?
Yeah.
So can I just add to what Robbie said? I was just reading, and doing some research prior to this, and there was something that actually was shared that I thought was really an interesting point, which is that the problem isn't getting women in at the entry level. The problem is making better use of their potential at the entry level, especially in middle management and leadership positions. And so I think that is the conundrum, right, that we face, especially the demographic of, the women. Then you have the women of color, and then you have caregivers, who a big bulk of caregiving is still really on women. And so if you take a look at the statistic of how many women have left the workforce, a big number of them are caregivers. So anyway, I just bring that out there because I do think that, to Robbie's point, if you take a look at all the stats, and if you take a look at who is in leadership positions, right? I think the gap there is honing in on the potential of the entry level workers, and especially the middle management.
Yeah, and that actually leads to my next question, which is, all of us are supportive of the diversity and inclusion initiatives, and we're all working within our own areas on it. And some of us are also caregivers. So this question, Sarah, we'll start with you. A lot of times we think about, caregiving as being a separate thing, diversity, leadership being a separate thing, and then your, day job being a separate thing. But I don't think that's the case. All of these skills that we gain from these roles are very interchangeable. So, Sarah, can you comment on what are the specific skills that you have gained or developed by being in a diversity role and also being a caregiver?
Great question. I would start on the side of being a caregiver and what that's bringing into the teams, the workplace culture, and the opportunity to really rethink our entire DEI space has really been leading with empathy and compassion and the mindset of always be learning. Because if I keep that open mindset, no one is better poised to face change management than a parent or caregiver. Because once you're in a potential groove, a milestone flips or changes, and you have to quickly adapt and pivot to that next stage of milestone or growth and support. So really bringing that perspective into my teams and workplace has only helped me and ourselves. And likewise, being in the space of DEI, constantly learning from other ERGs, employee groups that started well before most of us were here. They're doing that culture shift. They're doing the work of really reflipping these narratives of who is a leader, right? There's so many templates that we still have to break down of what it is to be a leader, and learning from all of you and ERG leaders and communities just keeps me motivated to keep it in the game here.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jess, you also talk a lot about neurological diversity. So how does that incorporate with the skills gained in the diversity leadership, plus your day job, plus all of the other diverse skills that you talk about?
Yeah, really good question. I'm not a caregiver, so I can't answer that part of the question. But in terms of neurodiversity, one of the things that is really important to understand is neurodiversity is a blanket term. It incorporates lots of different neurological disorders. There's a common understanding or description in the workplace that they are unseen disabilities. I don't think my way of thinking is a disability. I actually think it's a superpower. I can understand complex data sets, map things that other people find really, really difficult, and I see the world in a weird and wonderful way that no one else does. So the first thing for me to mention is that just because you don't, again, it goes quite similar to the representation point, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And the challenge with kind of, I guess, neurodiversity or unseen disabilities is that you, especially in the UK, you don't have to declare them. Under the Equality Act of 2010, you're protected. And now that's not the same in a lot of other countries. And how they, I guess, define what a neurological disorder is depends. But for me, it's allowed me to build my leadership skills. It's been allowed me to gain partnerships and build on my stakeholder engagement skills. Like lots of things that I probably would have been scared to do otherwise. And it's crucial in the D&I space, or DE&I or EDI, however you want to kind of cut the cake, because bringing all perspectives to the table are really important. And there's a quote that I put in, I think there's a quote that I put in the chat, and it's from a fantastic book, which I'll point to later. But it says diversity is having a seat at the table. Equity is for everyone at the table to have a seat, but on a chair that's got the same height. Inclusion is having a voice, and in belonging is having a voice that is heard. And I think that's incredibly powerful answer to that question, and it makes me reflect a lot.
Yes, I think it's important to call out that difference between what diversity is and inclusion and belonging, because a lot of time we interchange those words. And when we are in the workplace, it's important to address all of those making sure you have a seat at the table, making sure you have a voice and that voice is heard. Well said, Jess. Robbie, you are also a caregiver. Do you want to share your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Probably should have mentioned that earlier on. All right. But we have a coming up on 2 years old now next week, a little son. Um, and I loved. I'm sorry. I loved your point about the skills that you give from a change management point of view, because we're going through that at the moment. And I always relate some of the parenting tasks and skills that you learn to kind of three P's, and that you've got patience, new perspective, but then also a perseverance that you maybe might not have had beforehand. Um, and thinking about the importance of my life balance to work compared to what it was pre and post being a caregiver, the differences are so vast that you probably couldn't see the two of them within the same room. And having organizations being able to allow for that, accommodate that, but to be proactive in terms of communicating that to their workforce as well, alleviates so much from an anxiety point of view. There's mental constraint there that you're holding on to, because it's perceived now that I'm going to have the same level of output with less amount of time, with less amount of energy. And I don't know if anyone else has gone through the tireless nights that I've gone through for the last 2 years. I hear of some children who just sleep all through the night, but they seem to be a mystery in my household. But I know I can more so only really speak to my own personal experiences, in that my managers and my leaders would always promote family first. Your family health, your family safety, and your mental and physical well-being are the most important components to you being able to bring your best self to work, and to be able to focus on what you need to focus on when you need to focus on it. At the drop of a hat, I might need to close my laptop and drive down to crash and go and pick him up if there's been an accident. And the expectation from my manager is that I will go and do that if I need to do it. It really just promotes such a I think the best word for it. I have such a confidence in being able to manage my own time, being able to manage the expectations of my team, of my collaborators, my cross-functional partners, in that family comes first ethos. I think it's so important from a caregiver point of view, and I think that touches upon a lot of other areas as well, where it's pretty simple and basic communication, but then it's followed up with actions outside of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of these roles, whether it's caregiving, and all of the different perspectives we bring, like the neurodiversity and the work that we do in the diversity field, it absolutely helps us bring skills to the workplace. And I think all of the companies should really recognize that. I actually wrote an article how being a parent actually made me a better leader. I will put that link in the chat. So Ted, can you talk about what is the impact it's having on women who are actually being pushed out of SaaS?
Yeah. Gosh. Well, the interesting about women who are leaving, and I've talked to several women who've actually are now starting to really figure out what their next step is. And I don't think it's just women. I think that the pandemic has really forced us to look at what is most important. And so a lot of women were left by choice, or not, or furloughed, right? But they are now looking at other avenues for where they will really be valued. If you look at the small business boom, I think I forget what the percentage is, but the amount of small businesses that popped up during the pandemic is great. And a big number again of the people who have started small businesses were women of color. So I keep going back to, in terms of impact, there's a Forbes article that just came out that women have lost 800 billion just in the last year of wages. And a lot of those, again, are women of color who have left the workplace. So, in terms of impact from a financial perspective, it is huge. And because of this, the World Economic Forum just reported that we won't achieve equal pay for another 267.6 years. That's over a 10-year increase from their last report. So just sit with that for a second. 260 something years before we can get equal pay. And you wonder why you can't retain women in the workplace, specifically in tech, and just because it's a technology company, it doesn't mean that you need to have, it's not just engineering. And so I do think that there's a great opportunity for companies to really take a look at how they are. Well, first take a look at their people, processes, and systems, and see if their infrastructure really does support underrepresented groups, women in the workplace. But also, there are companies now who have programs where they're bringing women in who maybe have gaps in their careers. So in terms of impact, it is a huge one from an economic perspective. But I do think then with impact comes a lot of opportunity. And so I really would love for companies and leaders to really think through what their talent strategies could look like. With this return to office, guess who's going to be impacted the most? Caregivers. Okay. And people who may not have access to public transportation because they've left, or I know that there was an exodus here in the San Francisco Bay Area of people who have left because of the standard of living. So again, just really thinking through those things as you make strategic decisions about how to grow your business and grow your workforce.
Anyone wants to add anything?
I would love to add to Tet's comment, and also a bit of language Robbie spoke about. That proactiveness from management and leadership is so important right now, because we just can't assume that we're going back to any sense of normalcy before the pandemic. And it's also really important to name the issues. And I've seen several reports on this of companies and organizations get into a comfort level of talking about diversity, equity, inclusion at the highest level. But when you go down to the granular level of naming what that true bias or challenge is, that tension starts to get them to lean back of really digging in and solving for that bias. So it's worth mentioning, just in the history of employee resource groups, about 5-10 years ago, there were hardly any specifically focused on career moms, parents, caregivers in this space. But we know from the Great Places to Work organization, parents have some of the lowest feelings of belonging and sentiment in the workplace culture. So that's a huge gap. And that's why some of us have really leaned into adding caregivers to that DEI strategy. That's just one example of really showing how we have to start connecting segments and communities that really are getting impacted the most here.
Yeah, it's really surprising that women make almost 50% of the population, yet in the workplace we see these really disparate numbers. So we talked a bit about why women are leaving the workplace right now. Let's talk a bit about what can we do about it. So Sarah and Ted, you talked a little bit about coming back to work, and now with the vaccinations rolling in and companies are putting plans in place to get workmates back to physical work locations. Some of them are already doing that. And we talked about how it will impact women and caregivers in general. So what can we do about it? What does inclusive return to work look like? Robbie, we'll start with you.
Sure thing. So it obviously a massively important topic that a lot of my clients are actually seeking out advice for at the minute. And there's a huge amount of conversation, a huge amount of planning that's going into it, and the nuances and the variables that come in from putting in a strategy in place within the United States compared to what it might be within Europe. There's so many differences. Specifically thinking about how we have a more inclusive return to work. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a yes or no feel to it. It was almost like a T-junction that we were going to return to the office or we were going to work remotely. And what we're seeing now is that the appetite is there for both. And how companies can maximize and incorporate this flexible return to work into their and to be as a part of their diversity and inclusion and belonging strategies is to offer and allow that flexibility. I think people naturally assume the flexibility of work will relate specifically to someone either being remote or someone being in the office. And more and more so now, that's falling down in terms of the work hours, the expected hours and time that we're going to be in front of our laptops and in the office. The other component to it then is obviously where's the leadership. Do we have outspoken leadership in terms of where they're looking to drive their company, what the expectations are of the employees pre and post the pandemic worlds? I know that employee voice surveys is a huge component to this, gathering the data, gathering the feedback, understanding what the appetite is across the different layers of the organization from a demographics point of view as well, because there are different things to take into consideration in that way. So I know a lot of companies at the moment are planning that particular strategy right now. And I think the more of the employee voices that they hear, the more that they will be able to make relevant changes for relevant audiences. It's not a one size fits all approach that's going to work, that's going to allow for inclusivity as we go back and reimagine the future of work. People now know what both sides will do for their work-life balance. They know what both sides of do, and both sides in terms of remote work or office work. They know what they will do from a time management point of view. I know that I gain 2.5 hours every single day by not having to commute in and out of the office. I also know that I need sometimes to be able to focus. So I need to be able to go into an office. I need to put my head down. I need to be able to collaborate with people at a moment's notice. I need to be able to go and have those water cooler conversations for my career progression to be able to get the visibility that I need across my organization. But it doesn't mean that I can't do it if I'm not there. So one of the things that LinkedIn, I know Microsoft have done as well, is to make sure that each employee's voice and situation and their considerations are being taken into account when they're planning a strategy. I know it's an extremely long-winded answer, but I think the organizations who are focusing on the flexibility of the return to work as opposed to their thoughts on what the return to work is going to look like are going to be the ones that are going to put their best foot forward and ultimately be able to attract the most diverse audience, and particularly thinking about women and underrepresented groups going back into the workforce. I know from looking at LinkedIn data that I've shared with my clients that companies that are posting remote jobs are receiving over 25% more applications from Generation Z representatives and also women in particular as well, because they can allow for that accommodation of their work-life balance and what they need to prioritize their time on and where they need to spend their time physically in terms of a location.
Yeah, I have a friend who yesterday was just so happy she got a job offer for working remotely, and she's doing this after a 12-year break. So I think you hit it right on the head that, flexibility is the key. You have to look at the demographics. You have to look at your own company. But, what does that flexibility means in terms of your employees is going to be the key. And I know this is a question that everyone's trying to figure it out right now. Jess, I want to ask you, from your perspective, from your diversity, what does that balance look like, working from home versus being in the office?
Cool. That's a really good question. Do you mean personally or in general?
Both.
Okay. I think we're all different and we all have different needs. So taking a generalist stance, I don't think I can answer that because I'd never be able to do it justice. For me, I found working from home is something that I don't actually like that much. I'm an extrovert. I have very much struggled with the kind of work-life balance. My desk or office is in my bedroom, so I can like see my bed over there, if that makes sense. So I've definitely struggled with not having a boundary between work and home. And also I've really missed the commute. I used to feel a lot more structured because, I'd have a certain amount of time to get things done while I'm on the train, read a book or whatever it might be. In terms of what it might look like when we go back to normal, I really like hybrid working. So I like being able to have time, to go in the office or not. I mean, more and more, I think there's a couple of trends that I'm noticing. Places like, say, WeWork or open office spaces are really struggling. We've seen that. A lot more people are a lot more kind of focused on the benefits that working from home can bring. If you're a caregiver, if you have, different kind of responsibilities or obligations, but also, it opens up a lot of doors that we haven't really had. Before the pandemic, I would say a lot of companies would see working from home as a nicety and it's not a priority. Whereas I think now the future of work has changed. We've seen more and more that people are working, in those hybrid models or fully remote, as Robbie mentioned about all of these remote jobs, and also your friend Mamta. So for me, my ideal working like from home or from work would be 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. I would say that's my happy place.
There was I think, a McKinsey survey recently where they said most employees actually prefer 3 days or more, having that flexible, working from home versus coming to office. So having that balance. Sarah, I wanted to ask a follow-up question to you. We talked about flexibility is the key, and companies are trying to figure that out right now. How do we, what advice do you have for someone who wants to advocate for themselves on the kind of balance that works for them, working from home versus coming into office? What are kind of the strategies they can do to be more proactive about this?
It's a great question. One is to be in a little bit of an auditing mode first, just to see what is the tone, the communications, existing resources that maybe your company has already rolled out related to flexibility scheduling or return to office. I also specifically use return to office because we're all still working. So it's not return to work, because to your exact points, Jess, we have been overworking in our home capacity this past year too. So really thinking about what already exists, who can help you navigate what exists already, whether it's your people leader, are you comfortable having that conversation with them? If you're not, that's also a great opportunity where ERGs or employee resource groups really can provide a safe space to navigate those types of very intimate, personal conversations of what's going to work best for you. If you don't have an ERG, start one. We are here to help you and point you to resources. It just takes one person to make a mighty difference and change. And even speaking from personal experiences, we have absolutely influenced the thought leadership of including such as caregivers in performance check-in reviews. So people leaders are actually having that perspective of people on their teams too. So it's really what can you do in your own capacity of finding what works for you in your culture on your team. But there are multiple resources internally and externally to help navigate what works best.
Ted, do you have anything to add?
Well, Sarah hit on all the good points there. But I'll just share an experience in terms of doing this work. When I joined a technology company that was pretty big, what I did first and foremost was I found my people. So I went out of my way to really figure out the people who would understand who I was, but also the people like my support community. And found some wonderful people who are still friends to this day. But because I found my allies and I found my advocates, that made the advocation work easier. And so I'm not going to add any more to that, but I think for you to be successful in this space, it's finding your people, and ensuring that, because this work is hard, and so you have the people who you can talk to and who have your back when the going gets rough, because this is tough work and it's usually not valued or seen in the company, right? So
yeah, those are very good points. So Sarah talked about, having people leaders, talking to them, having those conversations. And Ted, you talked about the importance of advocates and finding your tribe, and confiding in those people can actually support you and guide you. So yeah, very good points. There is a question on the chat from Jackie. And Robbie, wanted to ask you if you can address this one. What do you think are the best ways to conduct an inclusive interview? And do you have any practical tips that we can implement in our hiring processes?
So yes, short answer, there are. What I would make sure that you're doing first and foremost is to incorporate diversity and inclusion all the way through the hiring process, from sourcing and engaging with candidates through the hiring panels. I know some of the companies that I've worked with, and just from speaking to people within the industry as well, people will make sure that there's an accommodations list sent out to all panelists prior to the interview. So if there's any specific requirements that they have, again, whether it's in a virtual world or within the office, that those are known prior in advance, and people can make the necessary arrangements. In a virtual world, in particular, I know a couple of organizations that are actually, it's mandatory now to have videos turned off during your interview. I know there are companies that use the LinkedIn Recruiter tool to source for candidates, and that they, across all of their licenses and seats, that they'll turn off the capability to view profile pictures. So there's a huge amount that you can do on the ground, from a process point of view, from an operational point of view. I think having diversity and inclusion, as a priority of each part of the process is key. So from communication between the recruiters to the hiring managers, from the hiring managers to the line managers, how you guys process your candidates through your applicant tracking system or your career site, whatever you may use, understanding what GDPR nuances go into it as well is extremely important, in terms of, I know certain platforms can allow for self-identification and certain platforms can't. At a very basic and manual level, there are things that you can do, and solutions that you can put in place that will offer the opportunity to scale. You can look at sharing percentages, and only percentages, with your line manager or hiring manager to the diversity panel that you will put forward for interview, and what we call a diversity slate, essentially. And then there are whatever requirements you guys have from a business point of view, and your own strategies will align into those as well, and that will allow for anonymous but impactful data for you guys to be able to show, well, from Q1 of last year to Q1 of this year, we have gone from 30% diversity within our hiring panels to 60%. they are tangible data points that you can take back to the business and celebrate, and then you can again implement that type of a process at scale across the organization. So without understanding kind of what size of business we're talking about, that might be something that might be really easily done by you guys on the ground, and like I said, have an impact on the overall business strategies and objectives. So I hope that answers the question for Jackie and gives her a couple of thoughts to on what she can go with.
Yeah, very well said,
Yeah.
Robbie.
Mamta, can I share a few things that I've learned on this inclusive interview too? And I know, is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. I think there's just a couple of things too. It's writing inclusive job descriptions is a key thing. So just making sure that your job descriptions are inclusive. Some companies have taken off the requirement to have masters or PhDs or even bachelors. They'll say you bachelors or this many experience, right? Also widen your search to include diverse talent pools, groups and pools of talent. So there's a bunch of companies out there who really, that's all that they do, is they are a sourcer for diverse groups of talent. So see if you can tap into those. And then, to Robbie's point, just allowing for reasonable adjustments at an interview. So those are, I think, some of the key things that I found are really helpful to make things inclusive, the inclusive hiring good or better.
Both of you also touched on some of the things that are also practices for, hindering the unconscious bias, because a lot of times people have this unconscious biases, not that they're intentionally trying to do, be non-inclusive, but it's just when you see those profile pictures or even name on their resumes, or if you don't hire from the diverse pool, if you have the same pool of candidates you always hire from, it can, increase those unconscious biases. Jess, I saw you were really agreeing to all of the points. Do you want to add anything? No? Okay. Very well done, Jackie. I hope you got some good information there. Toby also has a good question, and I'm going to ask it in a different way. Toby's question is, what are the best ways to make it clear that your company is committed to inclusivity? And I also want to add to that a question that I had in my mind. What are some warning signs of avoiding a non-inclusive workplace? So there are like the two sides of the same coin. Sarah, we'll start with you.
Sorry, Mamta, I was having audio issues. Do you mind repeating your question?
Yeah, so the question is, what are the best ways to make it clear your company is committed to inclusivity? That was Toby's question. But the other side of this is, what are the warning signs of a non-inclusive workplace? So if you want to address that.
Yes, no, thank you for that question. Even just from the past comments, it really is about that intentionality. Companies today have to be crystal clear on where they stand within their values, not just what they represent, but how they're going to put that into action. And the most you can do to bridge that trust is being incredibly visible and transparent as much as you are able to share what do your numbers look like today, right? Because it's about measurement and putting the strategy in place to improve those metrics moving forward. And there's real challenges to do that, but just simply stating the intention of wanting to do that and committed to doing that is incredibly powerful to build that trust and inclusion in your workplace. Some warning signs that I've personally experienced of thinking about how we reinvent work, especially for parenthood, is, I've been in tech startups in the past where their all hands meetings weren't even beginning until 5:30 in the evening. That is not supportive of people that have to go pick up their kids or take care of their elder family needs after hours. There were also signs that, people were okay to bring in their pets into the office, but if heaven forbid you brought your kiddo or family member, you were given the stink eye. So there's real tension, right? If you're not being really specific about the type of atmosphere and how we can be more supportive in working with each other. I hope that gave some examples there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just can you add to that? Because a lot of times, I don't know, unconsciously or even consciously, people don't realize it, with having this neurodiversity, like, how to even handle that. So can you provide some insight on that?
I mean, most people don't know how to handle it at all. And that's why I try and set an example and educate. For me, being one of the things that I've had previously is helpful feedback where I got an email. I'm dyslexic. I got an email that corrected my email with red pen. I had it sent back to me. Yeah, don't do that. Please don't do that. It comes across as very passive aggressive, and it doesn't do very good for the morale of the person who has the neurological disorder, because it's not something that you can switch on or off. I guess the one thing that I would want anyone who's kind of looking at building diverse workforces or building a more inclusive culture is understand that we're all different, and that anyone who has a neurological disorder will have different traits. Just because someone has ADHD, they can be an introvert, doesn't mean that they're going to run around with loads of energy. Just because someone has dyslexia doesn't mean that they can't be on the Mensa list, for example. I've got loads of friends who are like that. Just because each profile is so different. And also from a perspective of kind of drawing on from what Sarah was saying about kind of core working hours, I think core working hours are really vital. I've been in previous jobs where we had like a core working hour between 10 to 5, and every core, like, all hands meeting, 3-star kind of whip, everyone has to be there, was between those hours. And if you did anything outside of those hours, it was an exception. But it's also, I think, about there's also an onus on the person themselves about putting up their barriers and boundaries. Like I'm doing my PhD, for example. I don't have a little one, but I'm doing a PhD, so it's kind of like a baby. So let's just call it a baby. I have to have very clear delineations between when I'm actually going to do that work and when I'm not, because it is like another full-time job on top of what I'm doing. So I have carved out my schedule of saying, these are my core hours. This is when I will be around. If you put in something at a certain time where I have class. I can't make it. So one of the things that I've found with being neurodiverse and building inclusive teams is active communication. Don't kind of sit there and expect that the person is going to know what you're thinking or saying or feeling. And it's not regardless of whether you're neurodiverse or not, people aren't mind readers. I'm sure we're all victim of that or have done guilty of that at some point. But, having active communication channels, always following up. We can often also, the other thing for working with neurodiverse folk, we get really excited about the idea. Smaller details sometimes we can get a bit lost in. So following up with like emails, but with no red pen, is often really, really helpful. If anyone has any questions, I can happily take that offline as well, because it is a whole thing that you need to unpack. Giving neurodiversity, I'm not doing it justice.
Yeah, the red pen is a really big warning sign. So Toby, hopefully that answers your question, that there are definitely signs you can look for if your company is inclusive or not. But also, I think all of you have touched on that all of us are unique. So it also starts with us. What can you do to be more inclusive, be more diverse? And I always think about even outside of the workplace, like right when you go to a grocery store, when you're out on a walk, can you just be kind to people? Because I think it all starts with, kindness and respect. If we treat each other as human beings, and it's, I also say that I'm not a mind reader, and I say that to my family members also. So then please be explicit. Then if we cannot read the minds of the people we are living with, like how can we expect that in the workplace? So it also setting boundaries. Sarah, and as you touched upon that, setting the core working hours, setting boundaries for yourself is really, really key. And we only have a few minutes, and I wanted to ask each of you, what is the one action that you suggest that people can take today, either to advocate for themselves, or you also touched upon on self-care, Jess. So what is the one action that people can take, regardless of their gender, to make workplace more inclusive? Robbie, we'll start with you.
I get to take all the good answers. I'll probably go a bit more personally specific on this one. I have a bit of a diverse working history that has gone from hospitals to building sites, to bars to garden centres, and digital advertising to LinkedIn. So for me, the most important thing on my journey towards being an ally and being an advocate was the understanding piece, educating myself on the topics, on the priorities, and understanding the paths other people have walked and the journeys that other people have had to go through. Being able to gain perspective from team members around the world that I have access to on a daily basis is so invaluable. And there's so many resources now. There are so many online books, podcasts, e-learning, you name it. It's out there now from a diversity and inclusion point of view for people to be able to understand what the topic is, why it's so important, why it's so relevant, because you're not going to have anybody within your circle of friends, within your circle of family that isn't going to be impacted by some area of it. And I think the more people understand about the areas, I think the more people understand the limitations that it causes for certain groups of individuals, as well as just the overarching, the why, right? The moral, the ethics behind it. Mamta, to your point, treat others as you want to be treated. Do you want others to be kind to you? Would you want to be kind to others as well? I think that's probably the most important part from my perspective anyways. It was the catalyst for me to kind of really dive into these types of topics and to get involved in these types of discussions, and it really has allowed me to open my horizons and really give me a different perspective when it comes to new members joining the team, when it comes to news and events that are happening around the world, and being able to check in on a colleague or check in on a friend and just open that door for two-way communication for me to be able to learn is probably the most fundamental part of it, I would think. And that's speaking personally.
Thank you, Robbie. Sarah?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about just even some of the headlines we're seeing over the past week or so, and conversations that we're having with leadership. I would say let's really shift from mentorship to sponsorship. And the best way that I heard this recently was mentorship is somebody who could be in a power position to lift your career journey talking to you. Sponsorship is that same person talking about you. And that is such a huge difference, because most peers will only really listen from others at their similar peer level. So really starting to invest, to Tet's earlier point about access. And that is absolutely a key unlock in that, is really think about how you can not just be a mentor, but a sponsor, and really putting investment behind this space and community.
Yeah, very good point between mentors and sponsors. Ted, what's your view?
Yeah, I think, as people who work in the tech space, we sit in a very privileged position. And so for those of us who are working in the space, and to Sarah's point, I'm a huge believer in access. And one of the things that I am working on is access through mentorship, which equals to sponsorship, right, Sarah? So if you have the opportunity to help somebody and give them access, whether that's an introduction to somebody or talking about, a colleague and the wonderful work that they've done, do it. I think that's a good start. And if we all created access for everybody, I think we'd be in a much better place.
I do look forward to that world one day. Jess, how about you?
Yeah, I think most of the comments were already covered, but to draw on from Sarah's point, sponsorship 100%. But I think there's another level to that, is finding someone called an advocate. So it's a little bit different from a sponsor, whereby they advocate on your behalf in rooms that you can't enter already. And that's different from a mentor. It's different from a sponsor. And yeah, I'm doing a piece of research at the moment on it. So if anyone's interested, feel free to reach out and I can send you more about it. But yeah, I would say advocate, find an advocate.
Yeah, I agree too. I think we need more of mentors, sponsors, and advocates, all three of the above. I will reach out to Jess to find more about the advocates. I'm definitely interested in the topic. Yeah, and we are just about out of time. And thank you, Robbie, Sarah, Ted, and Jess. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Gemma, for bringing us together in the field of SaaS Festival. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you all so much. And thank you, Mamta, for moderating the panel, leading the questions, leading the charge on such an important discussion. Thank you all for joining us so much.
Thank you guys.
all.
Take care.
Hopefully see you all again soon. Bye, everyone.